Welcome to Being Human. I'm Barbara Keynes. Our show is about humanism. It's a show about understanding ourselves with the help of some of the brightest people you will ever meet. With us today is Dr. Christopher DiCarlo, who has written a number of learned books, including How to Become a Really Good Pain in the Ass. I'll ask him about how it did and whether he plans a sequel. But more seriously, I'm going to talk to him about The New Ethics, a synthetic understanding of good and evil, the title of a lecture he gave that won him a prize for big ideas.
Humanism has roots that go back to Socrates in the West and Confucius in the East. Humanist thinkers were key contributors to the Renaissance.
And later on, Chris and I will talk about the ethical debate that surrounds the subject of global warming. And we are back with Dr. Christopher DiCarlo. Why should humanists be interested in a synthetic understanding of good and evil?
Very good question. Humanists should be interested in understanding good and evil in a synthetic way because what I've done is I've developed a model that combines a synthesis of the knowledge we have of what I call systems. There are natural systems, there are cultural systems. For example, any one of us as a human being is a conglomerate of various types of systems, skeletal, nervous, endocrine, and so on and so forth. We function within a natural context of an ecosystem that's in a planetary system, that's in a galaxy, and so on and so forth. Within cultural systems, we also have education, commerce, finance, law, medicine, media, so on and so forth. So we function within a variety of cultural systems as well. A humanist tries to better understand how they are situated within those systems so that they can understand the constraints under which they behave. And when we come up with concepts of good and evil, these things are what's good or bad, or right or wrong, or fair or unfair. Essentially what we're doing is we're attributing value to human actions. Well, a humanist looks at human actions and says, how can I attribute value, good or bad, if I don't understand the constraints under which that person behaved? So, for example, when people commit various types of crimes, and we say, oh, they ought not to have done that, but we don't understand the constraints under which they behaved. For example, you hear about women sometimes leaping from bridges with their young children in their arms, and we say, oh, how horrible. And others will say, they never should have done that. How could they do that? And then we understand that they may have been suffering, say, postpartum psychosis, which is a severe form of depression, which is entirely beyond their control. So now we can look at a human being and say, you know what, it's not just about having a particular deity say, thou shalt not act in a particular way. It's much more sophisticated, and it's much more responsible, and it's a much more fair account of judging people's actions by understanding essentially all of those systems which come together into this particular ball I call the onion skin theory of knowledge. So the better we can go through those layers of complex causal elements, the more fair, the more appropriately we can judge people's behavior without having to appeal to a particular type of deity.
What are you doing with this information?
With this information, I'm developing what's known as the Ostock Project. This is a very ambitious, very large project which is interested in philanthropic interest to help finance it and support it. Essentially, I want to find editors of each one of those natural systems and each one of those cultural systems to be able to provide information, cutting edge, leading information, and then to bring people together to be able to see what those relationships are between those various types of systems so we can, well, more appropriately develop social policies regarding the management of human and natural resources.
What kind of reaction are you getting from humanists?
I'm getting great reactions from humanists. I found nothing but very good support for this idea and this project. What I need to do now is to spread the word a little bit more throughout the private sector for those who actually have the funding available. I think it is actually a moral responsibility for these people to basically say, if I think that's a good idea, I should want to help with that in any way I can, either through volunteer work or through financial support or whatever.
This lecture was extracted from your book,
Right.
And you talk about the 5 big questions in your
Yeah.
book.
Right.
Explain that.
The big 5 are basically in this order. What can I know? Why am I here? What am I? How should I behave? And what is to come of me? And I've centered the entire book around how people answer the big 5. And I basically divide people up into 2 categories, naturalists and supernaturalists. A naturalist, to which a humanist might find themselves, basically answer the big 5 according to the ways in which science and reason and ethics and whatnot has given them information. A supernaturalist might answer those questions by injecting ideas from, say, religious texts or from priests or rabbis or imams or that sort of thing. And so I just basically compare the way the 2 answer those big 5. So let's say I were to just answer them as a naturalist, right? What can I know? What are the limits of my knowledge? Well, the limits of my knowledge are limited by my language, my abilities to symbolically represent the world through mathematics and logic, through language. Our ability to have an intelligent conversation presupposes that we know what the words are and so on and so forth. I am aware of my ignorance of absolute reality. And of course, this comes from Socrates and the ancient skeptics, who were amongst the first in recorded history to say, I don't know what reality actually is, and guess what? Neither do you. And so we start with a sense of humility. What can I know? Very little. Very little. And that's at the absolute level of truth. At what I call the small t level of truth, there's lots we can know. If I were to hold keys in my fingers and I were to open them and you were to predict what would happen to those keys, you and I and all the crew here would be able to say, yeah, they're going to fall downwards.
Not if I caught them.
Not if you caught them. But you would still have to catch them because you would anticipate they would fall downwards. So on the small t level of truth, humanists and naturalists, we can garner universal agreement. But now, if I were a supernaturalist and I were to say, well, there's this God that allows for certain things to happen and whatnot, that's a lot more difficult for somebody to demonstrate. So in terms of what can I know, a humanist would say very, very little at the absolute level, but quite a bit down here at this small t level of truth. Right? Why am I here? Well, because of an accident, a series of a lot of accidents that led to my eventual development and evolution. What am I? I'm the descendant from African apes, a common ancestor between the chimpanzee and the human species from Australopithecines some 7 to 8 million years ago. How should I behave? Well, according to this onion skin theory of knowledge, that's what I'm going to try to find out. How can we better figure out how it is we wish to behave? And what is to come of me? We can answer this in 2 different ways, right? What is to come of me while I'm alive, which requires an awful lot of luck and good fortune, and what is to come of me after I die, which is a big question for an awful lot of people. Personally, I don't see anything happening to me after I die. Some of my students, some of my colleagues, some of my family will say, how can you possibly imagine nothingness? How horrible would that be? And I have the common thought experiment. I say, really? Do you remember what it was like 50 years before you were born? It's going to be like that. So you're really not going to be around to bemoan the fact that you're not around. So
I don't think people can wrap their heads around
it's a
that.
very difficult one because it scares a lot of people. You and I don't want the party to end. We could talk for hours. You know, I'm enjoying your company, you're enjoying mine. This is wonderful, right? But at some point it has to end. We have to go home to our families and so on and so forth. Well, death is the end of the party, and that's a real downer. I mean, I would prefer it not to end. But it takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of courage to be a humanist, to stare into that abyss and say, more than likely, that's how things are going to be. And what that does is it makes this life all the more important. And it means, what are we going to do in this life? How are we going to help other humans and other species on this planet while we've got the time?
What do you want humanists, and maybe after what you're talking about, a lot of people might be thinking, hey, I think I might be a humanist. What do you want them to do with these 5 questions?
I want them to think more carefully about how they answer them. In the introduction to the book, I basically state them and leave spaces for people to answer them. And then in the conclusion, I do the same thing to see if they've changed in any way. If you're a supernaturalist, you will answer those big 5 quite differently from the way others who are more naturally inclined will answer them. So I want the book to be essentially a learning process. Some people will already know exactly how they answer those big 5 and will answer them exactly the same way at the end of the book. Others maybe not so. They might be surprised with the way in which they've come to answer those. So for humanists, I'll be basically preaching to the choir, to borrow a pun. They will recognize within the book aspects of themselves they either already have seen or they're just recognizing for the first time.
What tips can you give people in order to be honest so they open themselves up to this type of philosophy?
Recognize what your biases are. Look into that mirror. Know why it is you believe what you do at this particular moment in your life. And then ask yourselves, have I done a responsible job at reflecting about why it is I answer the big five the way I have? And hopefully that will be an incentive in order for them to be much more honest, be able to come to a greater realization of who in fact they really are.
If people don't understand critical thinking, how would you explain that to them and the importance of it?
So anybody who reads the book, it's like a primer that will get them into a better mode of understanding, how to think. It's surprising. Your kids go to school. They're taught by various types of teachers and whatnot, who all assume they know how to think. It's like breathing. We don't have to teach people how to think. Everybody knows how to think. They can walk and talk simultaneously. They seem fairly astute and so on and so forth. We need to teach critical thinking from kindergarten all the way through high school, because we're not doing a good enough job about getting people to understand the mechanisms behind what goes on when you think critically about your particular views about these, not only the big five, but all of the other ways in which we answer questions that trickle down from how we answer the big five.
Before we leave, I have to get to the fascinating part of your book that was, we're all from Africa. What evidence do you have that substantiates this?
A truckload. Do you want me to bring it in?
Yeah.
The evidence,
can you recap?
Yeah, the evidence is so overwhelming that our ancestry lies in Africa, based not only on migratory patterns of where we can see populations moving throughout Africa and into Asia and then eventually into Europe and the Americas, but certainly tool use, the transition of art, certainly morphological or skull and bone artifacts as well. But of course, the main one is within your body, it's within my body, it's within everybody's body. Your DNA is a time machine. You literally have genetic markers in your DNA. And if you were to give a sample, biologists could determine, based on those mutations in your DNA, where your ancestors went after they left Africa. And to me, this is just, overwhelming evidence that we see a coalescence of all populations on this planet, and all of the mutations in their DNA leads back to Africa.
Why is this information so important to the humanist?
It's important because what it does is it immediately levels the playing field and makes all humans exactly the same. You are not the chosen people. No offense. You might think you are, but you're really not. We all came from the same place, and that means we all share the same desires and wants and so on and so forth. Secondly, it gives us an element of humility.